Have you ever been wrestling with a really tough problem, feeling totally stuck, just hitting a wall, and then suddenly, snap, a light bulb goes off and everything just clicks into place?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe you're learning something complex, it's frustrating, you feel like you're not getting anywhere, and then out of nowhere, a wave of understanding washes over you like a hidden door just opened.
It's that amazing aha moment, isn't it? When something that seemed impossible to grasp suddenly becomes, well, clear, almost simple even. It really feels like a breakthrough.
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating, and this is what we're diving into today, is that the most advanced AI models we have, those powerful transformers behind chatbots and creative tools,
Yeah.
they experience something remarkably similar.
Right.
It's called abrupt learning. They can be stuck in what looks like this long, frustrating plateau. Performance is barely budging. And then seemingly out of the blue, they get it.
And boom. Yeah.
Boom, their capabilities just skyrocket. It's like a sudden phase transition in how they learn.
And this isn't just some quirky observation. For AI researchers, understanding these sharp phase transitions, these moments of sudden insight, is really a critical frontier. It helps us grasp the very nature of how these complex systems learn, how they get sophisticated abilities.
Moving from just random outputs to something coherent, something intelligent.
Exactly. It's like watching the precise moment intelligence, or at least complex capability, emerges.
So for you, our listener, hopefully someone curious about the cutting edge of AI, our mission today is to take a real deep dive into a groundbreaking new paper. This research, it doesn't just describe abrupt learning, it actually pulls back the curtain to show us what's really going on during that mysterious lost plateau, that time when the model seems totally stuck.
And crucially, why it happens. We're going to unpack the innovative insights the researchers uncovered, focusing on the underlying mechanisms and some really surprising implicit biases that just sort of emerge.
Yeah, implicit biases, that sounds intriguing.
We won't get lost in super dense technical jargon, but we will explore some genuinely academic and innovative findings. This is really about understanding the fundamental learning dynamics of AI.
And how these surprising, unprogrammed biases can pop up just from the training process itself, right? From gradient-based training.
Precisely. We'll see how some core aspects of how we train AI aren't just interesting quirks, but they're absolutely crucial to their development and maybe even shape the kind of intelligence they end up with.
Okay, let's get into it then. Let's unpack this mystery. Our journey starts with this mysterious plateau. So picture a transformer model, it's training, it's chugging along, and its performance just flatlines.
Right.
The loss, that's a measure of how much error it's making. It seems stubbornly high, it's not improving. It's like the model is stuck in the mud, just spinning its wheels.
Yep.
So the big question is, what exactly is going on under the hood during this period? Is it just sitting there doing nothing? Or is something else happening?
It's definitely not doing nothing. It's far from idle. This is an inactivity. Something profoundly important and actually quite strange is happening. The paper identifies several of these implicit biases that really characterize this early plateau phase.
And these aren't biases programmed in by humans, you're saying?
No, not at all. They emerge naturally just from the gradient-based training process itself. You can almost think of them like shortcuts the AI learns by default because they're, well, easier to find in the huge space of possible solutions it's exploring.
Okay, that's a key innovation right there. Identifying these biases that just emerge. It's like finding unconscious habits in an AI. So tell us more about the first one they found. Partial solutions. What does that actually mean?
Well, during this initial lost plateau, the model isn't completely useless. It often learns what the researchers call a partial solution. Basically, it gets really good at the simpler parts of the task, even while it's still totally failing at the harder, more complex bits.
Okay.
So this leads to overall low accuracy, right? Which gives you the impression that it's stuck. But underneath, it's actually making this sort of piecemeal progress.
Interesting. Can you give an example?
Sure. So they used a task called moving window sum, or MWS. The model has to sum numbers in a sequence within a kind of sliding window. Now, the paper points out that for this task, the very first output, ASPWS, is just a simple copy of the first input, 6-by-Ler. That's by far the easiest part of the problem.
Right.
And the researchers found the model learns this trivial copy part really, really quickly, even while its overall accuracy on the full sum calculation is still terrible.
So even when it seems stuck globally, it's not idle. It's tackling the low-hanging fruit first. That actually seems pretty efficient in a way.
Exactly. This early success on the simpler bits shows how models, maybe unconsciously, break down problems. They try to build understanding from the ground up, even if it's an implicit strategy.
But then things get weirder, right? As the researchers looked closer at this plateau, they found this really strange habit, a repetition bias. The models started spitting out repetitive stuff like X, X. That sounds wrong for a learning system. How did they measure that?
Yeah, it is counterintuitive. They quantified it using something they call repetition frequency, using the Greek letter rho. It basically just measures how often the model spits out the same token one after another.
Okay.
And what's truly fascinating is the dynamic. This repetition frequency shoots up really fast in early training. For that MWS task, it could hit like 0.8, meaning 80% of consecutive tokens were the same.
Wow.
But then, and this is key, as the model starts to actually learn the task and its overall performance improves, this repetition frequency drops sharply. It plummets.
So it's definitely not random noise. It's a real pattern.
Absolutely. They call it a significant implicit bias arising from gradient-based training, something the training process itself encourages early on.
Okay, so it's not just my teenager repeating things when they don't know what else to say, but does this only happen with obvious back-to-back repetitions? What if the task is designed so that shouldn't happen?
That's a great question, and yeah, another important finding. Even for tasks like prefix sum, where the correct answers are not supposed to be repetitive consecutively, the model still showed a form of repetition bias.
How so?
Well, instead of repeating the same token, it would just use a very small set of different tokens over and over again. They measure this using something called sequence entropy, or
Sequence entropy, like how diverse the output is.
Exactly. Low entropy means lots of repetition, very predictable. High entropy means diverse and unpredictable. And they found that even on prefix sum, the model significantly lowered its sequence entropy. It suggests this tendency towards simplicity, towards limited variability, is really quite deep.
Okay, so why? Why repetitive? Why does the model fall into this seemingly, suboptimal trap?
This is where it gets really cool. And it's a profound insight, I think. The researchers designed another task called Repeat 1. In this task, the correct answer, the ground truth, is inherently repetitive. All the outputs are just copies of the very first input token.
Okay, so the answer should be repetitive.
Right. And what did they find? For that task, the model showed no noticeable loss plateau at all. Training was smooth, direct, right from the beginning.
Whoa.
This strongly suggests that repetitive sequences are just fundamentally easier from an optimization perspective. The model defaults to this bias early on because it's a simpler path. It's more readily available in that huge complex landscape of possible solutions it's navigating. It's taking the path of least resistance initially.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It's like find the easy pattern first, like a kid learning sounds before words. Okay, so we have partial solutions, we have this weird repetition bias, and then there's something called internal representation collapse. What's going on inside the model's head during this plateau?
Right, so think of the transformer's hidden states as its internal thought process, its numerical representations of the information it's juggling. During the plateau, the researchers made another striking observation. These hidden states across different positions or tokens in the sequence became nearly parallel.
Nearly parallel, what does that mean?
Basically, they're cosine similarity, a way to measure how alike two vectors are, often shot up above 0.9. A score of 1 means they're identical, 0 means they're unrelated. So 0.9 is extremely similar.
So everything inside starts to look the same?
Pretty much. They call it a degenerate representational geometry. Imagine this complex internal landscape of understanding just flattening out, losing its distinct features, like the model starts seeing everything through the same blurry lens.
Which would definitely explain why the outputs become repetitive and undifferentiated. Okay, when does this collapse happen? Is it there right from the start?
No, and that's a crucial distinction they make. This collapse is not there in initialization. It pops up really quickly after just a few training steps. They measure it with pairwise cosine similarity, COSE.
And is this the same as rank collapse, which people sometimes talk about?
Good question. No, they point out it's distinct. Rank collapse tends to happen right at initialization, especially in deep transformers with soft max attention. This representation collapse happens after training starts, and they saw it even in simpler models with linear attention. It suggests a different mechanism is at play.
Okay, different mechanism. Did they figure out where inside the model this collapse was happening? Did that give any clues about the why?
They absolutely did, and yes, it's a huge clue. They pinpointed that this collapse primarily occurs after the attention layer, within what's called the residual stream, a key pathway in the transformer, but not before it.
Ah, so the attention layer seems to be involved.
Exactly. The location strongly implies that the transformation performed by the attention layer itself is directly implicated in causing this internal degeneracy. It's almost like the attention mechanism, in its early unrefined state, is inadvertently oversimplifying the model's internal world.
Okay, wow. So we have this mysterious plateau. It's got these weird implicit biases, partial solutions, repetition, internal collapse. The model seems really stuck. But here's the twist, right? While the overall loss looks flat, the researchers found something else was happening, a hidden engine.
Indeed. This brings us to maybe the most critical innovation in the paper. Identifying the learning of the attention map is the primary bottleneck, the key that unlocks the plateau.
Okay, tell me more.
Even during that period where the loss looks totally stagnant, they found that a measure they devised, the Attention Progress Measure, or APM, was actually gradually increasing.
APM, what's that measuring?
It essentially tracks how close the model's internal attention patterns are getting to the optimal way it should be, focusing on the input for that specific task.
So the attention map, how the model decides where to focus its spotlight on the input that's actually getting better, slowly but surely.
Exactly. It's improving
Yeah.
before you see that sudden, visible drop in the loss. This is a huge insight. Progress is happening. It's just hidden from view if you only look at the main loss curve. The attention system is quietly figuring things out.
That's fascinating. So the attention mechanism, how the transformer figures out what's relevant, is getting better in the background. And they didn't just observe this, right? They did experiments to prove it.
Oh yeah, they ran some really clever experimental interventions to directly test this hypothesis. For example, they tried giving the model a little help. They actually biased its attention weights towards the optimal pattern it should be learning.
Kind of whispering the right answer to its attention.
Sort of. A multiplicative bias, technically. And when they did that, convergence was much faster. And crucially, those degenerate behaviors, we talked about the repetition bias, the representation collapse, they were significantly reduced. That peak cosine similarity measuring the internal collapse, much lower, and it didn't last as long.
Wow, direct link. So fixing the attention helps fix the biases. What about the other way? Did they try pushing it away from the right attention?
They did. When they biased the attention map away from the optimal pattern, using a factor less than 1, it led to slower convergence. And those periods of high repetition and deep representation collapse lasted much longer.
Okay, that's pretty strong causal evidence then. Attention really seems to be at the heart of both the problem and the solution during this phase.
Exactly. These interventions really nail down the pivotal role of attention learning.
So the ultimate test, I guess, would be, what if you just gave the model the perfect attention mechanism right from the start? Did they try that?
They did. And this is where the evidence becomes incredibly powerful. Almost like giving the model the cheat codes for that part of the learning.
Okay.
They initialize the attention layer's weights. That's the key query value and output weights, the WK, WQ, WV, WOA matrices that control how attention works. They set them to their final optimal values right from the beginning. Then they only trained the rest of the model, like the MLP layers.
And the result?
Dramatic. The training time was drastically reduced. And the critical part, the loss plateau, the repetition bias, the representation collapse, they were virtually eliminated, gone.
Wow. So it just completely bypasses all those early struggles, the weird biases, the internal confusion, just smooth sailing.
Pretty much. And just to be sure, it was specifically the attention part that was the bottleneck.
They tried initializing other parts optimally, like the MLPs or the embedding.
Exactly. And when they did that, it didn't really change the overall training dynamics much. The plateau and the biases still showed up.
Okay, that seals it then.
It powerfully reinforces their conclusion. Learning the optimal attention map is a major unique bottleneck. It's the main reason for these early training issues, and learning it properly is the key to breaking through that plateau.
These are really fascinating insights, especially from these controlled, smaller experiments. They give us this amazing window into the microdynamics of AI learning. But, the big question for a learner like you listening, someone interested in real-world AI, is probably, okay, is this just some weird effect in toy setups, or does this actually scale up? Does it happen in the massive models we use every day, the LLMs?
Right, the scale-up question. And this leads us to the paper's final and, I think, critically important, innovation. they did validate these findings in large language models.
Well, they did.
Yes. They confirmed these patterns aren't just artifacts of small synthetic tasks. They seem to be pretty universal characteristics of transformer training.
How did they even test that on models of that size? That sounds challenging.
They were systematic. They tested large, well-known open-source LLMs. Models like Pythia, ranging from 14 million parameters up to 2.8 billion parameters, and even the OLMo 27B models.
Okay, so real big models. And what did they find in the early stages of training those?
Well, right in the early pre-training steps, this is the foundational learning phase for these huge models, they observed strong representation collapse. Just like in the small models, the average cosine similarity shot up rapidly to over 0.9 within just a few training steps, that same degenerate internal state.
Wow, okay. And the repetition bias, did that show up too? That weird habit of repeating things?
Absolutely. And in a really striking real-world way, this is quite powerful evidence. Early outputs for many prompts given to these LLMs showed trivial repetitions.
Like what?
Like, for instance, the model might just repeatedly generate new line characters, the N symbol, over and over again, or other simple common tokens. It's a clear, undeniable echo of the repetition bias they saw in the smaller controlled experiments.
So it really is universal.
It seems so. It confirms its universality.
So if we step back and connect this to the bigger picture, this confirmation means these degenerate patterns, the partial solutions, the repetition bias, the representation collapse, they aren't just quirks. They're fundamental characteristics of how transformers learn, especially early on. They show up even in the foundational stages of training these massive models like Pythia and OLMo 2.
Exactly. And that has pretty significant implications for how we understand and maybe even how we develop LLMs. It suggests these initial struggles, these biases, are kind of intrinsic to how these powerful models start to learn.
It gives us a much deeper understanding of maybe why they act oddly in early training, or why sometimes training seems to stall before suddenly improving.
Right. It's like finding these universal principles of learning that apply across vastly different scales, from tiny experimental models to the absolute giants we use today. And understanding this could help us train them more efficiently, maybe predict where they might struggle, or even design ways to help them get past these plateaus faster.
Okay, so let's recap this deep dive. We started with this fascinating idea of abrupt learning, that sudden leap in performance after a long, confusing plateau.
Right. The aha moment for AI.
Then we dug into that lost plateau itself, pulling back the curtain thanks to this research, and uncovered these surprising implicit biases that define it. The model learning partial solutions first.
Exhibiting that pervasive repetition bias in its outputs.
And suffering from that dramatic internal representation collapse where everything inside starts looking the same.
And then we hit the core innovation. Identifying the learning of the attention map as a major bottleneck explaining these issues. The quiet progress of attention during the plateau, and how fixing attention fixed everything else. That was key.
Yeah, the experiment showing that directly intervening on attention had such a dramatic impact, either speeding things up or slowing them down, really drove that home. And initializing attention optimally basically eliminated the problem.
And finally, the crucial validation step. Seeing that these aren't just lab effects, but that these fundamental dynamics like repetition bias and representation collapse show up even in the early pre-training of huge LLMs. They're universal.
So why should you, listening now, care about all this? Why this deep dive?
Well, because understanding these phase transitions, these internal struggles and breakthroughs, helps us grasp how AI models actually learn complex abilities. It's not just about what amazing things they can do, but the process behind it.
It's about demystifying how intelligence or capability actually emerges in these systems.
Exactly. And potentially, it paves the way for building better AI, more efficient training, more robust models, maybe models less prone to getting stuck in these weird initial states. It helps us see the logic behind the struggle.
And this leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to maybe mull over. If transformers naturally seem to gravitate towards these easier, simpler, more repetitive solutions first, before they make that sudden leap to optimal performance, how might that reflect a more universal principle? Maybe something about learning itself, even in us and biological systems.
Yeah, there's that initial simplification, like a child repeating sounds before forming sentences, or maybe an artist practicing basic strokes before a masterpiece, or even a scientist focusing on a simple maybe obvious hypothesis first. Does that somehow pave the way?
Hmm.
Does it lay a necessary foundation for later, more complex understanding and those sudden breakthroughs?
What stands out to you about this pattern, this cycle of initial stuckness, maybe simplification, followed by sudden clarity? Whether you see it in AI or perhaps even in your own experiences learning something new, something to think about.